Paul was just talking a little bit about the weather. We're talking about weather, about how flooding and rain and these things are natural events that we can't control. I said that a couple of people died up in Queensland from the storm. If they don't die from the storm, they'll die from something else. We all have to die. And just talking now about how even in the time of the Buddha, and the way the Buddha helped set up ways of administering the Sangha and the Vinaya, the training rules and the administration of the Sangha, it's also related to seasons and the different effects of the seasons. So we have the Vasa, it's the rainy season. We have the allowance to stay for 3 months in one place to protect us from the rain, and so we don't have to go moving around, travelling around during the rainy season, monsoon seasons. Then you have the Vasa privileges, so like after the Vasa for a month there's certain allowances, particularly with things like cloth. You're allowed to sew cloth, collect cloth, keep cloth without having to determine it or bin to it. And that's relating to the difficulties of the monsoon season, and that's even extended if you have a katina. Most of your Vasa allowances are extended for another few months after the katina. So if you think about it, part of it is just giving us skillful ways to deal with the natural seasons and the effects on our lifestyle. So say particularly in Asia where it's monsoon time, these allowances are connected to that. I was just saying how any good management system or administration system has to be flexible enough to allow for different circumstances that arise. Sometimes based on past experience. Modern phrase might be forward planning and planning for risk management and all those things. So give an example of the airport, how they had to cope with all the delays with the flights and the confusion from the weather system yesterday, which made all the domestic flights delayed or stopped or changed. He says so they have ways to deal with that. They made the announcement that everyone can have a free meal while they're waiting for the plane, even though we can't eat as monks, but they allowed us, if we wanted to have a free meal. Just saying that's a sign of somebody who's thinking how to deal with a situation, particularly to deal with people's states of mind, because as the Buddha said, not getting your wishes fulfilled or not getting what you want is suffering. And you see that particularly in travelling. People get frustrated when they want to get somewhere and they can't get there on time, or they just can't get there. So that's the airline company's small way of dealing with that. They try to give people a sense of comfort and being looked after to help offset their frustrations. Saying you might say the thing that defines human beings is that they have intelligence, mindfulness, ability to learn or wisdom, and they can use that to deal with the situations, the experiences they find in their life. So say with rain, storms, rain, flooding and all this, you can still turn it to your advantage. Something like that. You can collect that rainwater. You make dams, rainwater tanks and so on. So even though there's a lot of rain and it can be destructive, you can also collect it and then use that rainwater as a natural resource. That's what identifies somebody a being with intelligence. They start learning how to adjust to the different situations that arise using their intelligence. So it's different, say, from an animal that all it knows maybe is just to try and find a tree to, say, he said like a bird, just to find somewhere to get out of the rain, but doesn't really know how to make use of the rain or use of the different situations it's in. All it can do is just run from danger or hide from danger. And he says this is also, the nature of the Buddhist path. Bahungwe Saranangyanti is like one of the chants we do. That people tend to, in times of danger and threat, they seek refuge. And people have different refuges, especially in the old days, or people who are not yet perhaps spiritually developed. Well, they'll seek refuge in lesser things, so maybe just physical things, and seek refuge in trees and mountains, establish them as sort of places of worship, or various teachings or rituals which brings them some comfort to deal with the dangers of life. The Buddhist path is bringing you to use your intelligence, take refuge in your own mindfulness, your own wisdom, and develop that to deal with the difficulties of life, the suffering of life. Because even if we can't completely free ourselves from suffering, at least the majority of human beings living in the world, they do use their intelligence to work out ways to deal with the suffering, particularly suffering of, say, natural disaster and the dangers and difficulties of things like weather and climate, environment and so on. We use our intelligence in that way. One of the ways we learn in life is through suffering and difficulties that we encounter. Again, human beings have that ability to reflect on their experience, learn from their experience, and this is the founding principle of the Buddhist path. You take suffering and you learn from it, you get to understand it, and it leads you on to develop wisdom by becoming aware of suffering, what it is, its nature, how it's affecting you. So, just carrying on from what he was saying last time, people have suffering in their lives, different things come up, but you can turn it into something positive even by investigating it rather than just reacting to it, or getting caught into the suffering of the experience. You can turn it into something you can learn from. He said, if you think about it, what we call in Buddhism the four, they're usually translated as heavenly messengers, Devadutas, but really this word heavenly, the Deva Duta, means like messenger or information giver. Deva means heavenly, but it also means higher or superior. So it's like the highest kind of information or message that we can receive is the Devadutas, the messengers of birth, of old age, sickness, death, and seeing a samana. But if you think about it, these old age, sickness and death, these are things that give rise to suffering. They're expressions of suffering for human beings, but they're actually something you turn into the very highest kind of teaching or message, is that they give you the motivation to practice. When you encounter old age, sickness, death, you're turning something that is suffering, very obviously in its nature, but it turns around to be the stimulus for you to practice by reflecting on it and seeing, oh, this is the nature of life, it's like this. You turn your suffering into something high, something superior in that way. Saying again examples of how humans, they develop themselves and develop ways of dealing with suffering. So on the physical level, he's saying the most basic things we have to deal with in life is things like heat and cold. We have to protect ourselves from the extremities of too much heat, too much cold. Jeff just gave the example of camels as an animal is adapted to living in the desert where it's extreme heat, but they've learned how to deal with it. Then on the spiritual level, you can say our way of adapting to suffering is through developing the qualities of the path. They said the most basic things you're developing are the quality of morality, learning to lead a harmless life, achara, which is like good manners, learn the skills of skillful social interaction and respect for others. And then ditthi is like right view, basically developing right view in your outlook, your attitude to life, learning to train that so that you're reflecting with wisdom on the way you look at things. So these are the most basics of Dhamma practice, you could say. So most important is ditthi, is view, but in this, the way they use it, it's this sense of self-view, self-importance, and it usually used in partnership with the word mana, which means like conceit again. So it's self-view, self-importance. And this is a vital thing to investigate because it's the cause of so much suffering, particularly one's relationships with other people. If one holds firmly to one's own self-view, then naturally it can bring one into conflict with others. When people do have conflict, disagreement, well, generally it's over views. I'm right, you're wrong, that kind of thing. So it's the cause for a lot of delusion. When we fall into self-view or hold to self-view, it's a cause of delusion and suffering. So he says, they say for monks in particular, when we lose that awareness of how we might be falling into our own self-view, our own conceit, well, if we lose that awareness of that, well, it brings us into difficulty, say, living in harmony with the rest of the Sangha. One loses respect for others because one's holding to one's own self-view. Then one is no longer, say, willing to listen to others, willing to compromise with others. And when they first established Wat Pah Pong, it's a forest, and it's a new monastery. It's just basically forest, so people coming in maybe haven't yet established the perception that it was a place of practice, a forest monastery. So Ajahn Chah had the monks write a few signs, say, on the pathways into the forest, so that people would know where they're coming into. It's now a monastery, no longer just a forest. And there was a big sign written by Luang Por Jan, one of Luang Por Liem's contemporaries, at the front of the monastery, a big notice, and it says, here is a place of respect, you might say, or a place for developing respect. There's all those with faith coming into this place, may they abandon their attachment to views, meaning self-views or selfish views, you might say, and reduce or let go of their conceit. It's the first thing you would see when you come into Wat Pah Pong, is this sign with the saying this is a place of respect. You might also say a place of practice, Dhamma practice, but the actual word translates as respect. So that's how they describe practice. It's from the very beginning you're developing a sense of humility and letting go of self, letting go of pride, conceit and attachment to your own views and opinions. So you're letting go of that, abandoning that. That's the very beginning of the practice. So they had that right at the front of the monastery. It said the Buddha pointed out that attachment, upadana, is the cause of suffering, our attachments. So, and then he talked about the different kinds of attachment that we have, that we develop. One is the basic attachment to the sense of self or self-importance, attawada upatana, which builds up over time through ignorance and lack of mindfulness, interpreting everything as a self, belonging to a self, me, mine, all of that. Another kind of attachment, ditta upatana, or the attachment to views. You might say strong attachment to views, strong identification with views, and obviously wrong views or views that are not in line with truth. So this is why it's a cause of suffering. It's the way one thinks, one's outlook on life. And he said one of the best teachings the Buddha gave that you can use at all times to help train yourself in developing right view through the development of mindfulness and reflection, wise reflection on whatever it is that you're considering, to develop a wise view, a wise understanding of it, is the Kalama Sutta. This sutta he gave to the Kalama people who were in doubt, caught into doubt, uncertainty about who to believe, because they had many teachers visiting their town, and they said to the Buddha, well, this teacher says one thing, another teacher says another, who do we believe? How can we decide what is true, what is the right path? And he gave a sort of a list of the categories or the ways of deciding how to proceed. He said, don't just take things, you can read that sutta, it goes through all the different things. Don't just take things on tradition or hearsay, or just because a teacher is famous, don't just immediately believe him. And so on. You take your time to use your mindfulness, your wisdom, and wisely reflect on the teaching until you really understand it, whether it's true or not. And if it's true, well, you can accept it and use it. If it's not, well, you have to disregard it. He said, Northeast Thailand has a saying in line with this, is that if you study the water, meaning water like ponds and rivers, then you get to know the habits of fish. If you take your time to get to know someone, if you take your time, then you'll get to know someone, what they're like, what their character is. Something like that. So study the water and you'll get to know the fish. Take time and you can get to know a person, meaning that person, whether they're wise or not, whatever their character is. I just told Luang we have an evening meeting where we do meditation, chanting, and then invite him to give a talk. He said, it's good for people to come together to practice meditation, and they can develop their samadhi, concentration. He said, maybe upajara samadhi, access, concentration, the level of that, or apana samadhi, the level of absorption, whichever they find convenient. So the development of samadhi, usually talk about samatha samadhi, development of the calm, tranquility. Vipassana samadhi is focusing on the three characteristics to develop insight. So developing samatha, the foundations to bring the mind to a state where it's free from worry and concerns about other things. Come down there.